Every one of us at some point has been brought to our knees by something we did not see coming. A relationship that ended without warning, a career that crumbled despite years of effort, a diagnosis that changed everything in a single afternoon, a betrayal from someone we trusted completely. In those moments, the world does not pause to ask if you are ready. It does not soften the blow or offer you a gentler version of the truth. It simply delivers the weight, and then it waits to see what you are made of. This is the universal condition of being human, and it has not changed in 2,000 years. The same storms that shook the ancient world shake ours today. The same fears, the same losses, the same crushing pressure of circumstance pressing down on the chest of the living. And yet, there have always been those rare individuals who seem to move through such storms differently. Not without pain, not without difficulty, but with a quality of inner steadiness that most people never develop. The ancient Stoics called this quality of mind the foundation of a well-lived life, and no one wrote about it with more fire, more depth, or more devastating honesty than a Roman statesman named Lucius Annius Seneca. Seneca was not a man who theorized from the safety of a comfortable library. He was exiled by an emperor, recalled to tutor the boy who would become Nero, survived one of the most politically dangerous courts in Roman history, lost enormous wealth, watched close friends die, faced his own death with full awareness, and ultimately was ordered to take his own life. Every word he ever wrote about mental toughness was tested in fire. And what he left behind in his letters, his essays, and his reflections is not a dry philosophical system. It is a survival manual for the human soul. Today we are going to walk through 6 of the most powerful lessons Seneca ever gave us about mastering mental toughness. These are not motivational slogans. These are weapons forged in genuine suffering, offered freely to anyone willing to pick them up and use them. The first lesson Seneca ever gave us cuts straight to the root of almost all human weakness, and it is this: stop treating time as though you have an endless supply of it. Seneca opens one of his most famous letters with words that should rattle every single person who reads them. He writes that we are not given a short life, we make it short. We are not given a small amount of time, we waste it. We pour it out, we scatter it, we let it drain away in distraction and delay and half-hearted living, and then at the end we complain that there was not enough. Mental toughness, for Seneca, begins here. It begins with the decision to stop living as though tomorrow is guaranteed. Most people spend their entire lives in what Seneca calls a kind of sleepwalking. They are not truly present in their own lives. They are waiting for the right moment to start, waiting for fear to disappear, waiting for permission they will never receive. They postpone the hard conversation. They defer the difficult decision. They tell themselves that once things settle down, once the kids are older, once the debt is paid, once the season changes, they will finally begin living with intention. But the seasons keep changing, and the postponement becomes the life. Seneca observed that the person who is always preparing to live never actually lives, and this is not just a philosophical observation. It is a psychological trap that swallows entire human lives. The mentally tough person has made a different kind of peace with time. They have accepted, at the deepest level, that this moment is all they are guaranteed. Not tomorrow, not the weekend, not next year. This moment. And from that acceptance comes a quality of urgency that has nothing to do with panic and everything to do with clarity. When you truly believe that time is finite and precious, you stop tolerating mediocrity in yourself. You stop allowing fear to run the clock. You stop spending your best energy on things that do not matter. Seneca said that we should live each day as though it could be our last, not in a reckless or nihilistic way, but in the sense that we should do nothing today that we would be ashamed to have as our final act. If you knew this was your last day, would you spend it in resentment? Would you waste it on trivial anger? Would you shrink from the thing you have been avoiding? The answer, for most of us, is no. And yet we behave exactly that way on days we assume will be followed by many others. Mental toughness begins when you close the gap between how you would live if time were short and how you actually live right now. Seneca is asking you to stop borrowing from a future that has not promised to arrive. The second lesson Seneca teaches us about mental toughness is one that our modern culture works very hard to prevent you from learning. Voluntary hardship is the training ground of the unbreakable mind. Seneca practiced something he called the voluntary contemplation of adversity, and beyond contemplation, he practiced voluntary discomfort. He would periodically eat simple, rough food. He would wear modest clothing even when he could afford otherwise. He would deliberately experience reduced circumstances, not out of guilt or performance, but as training. His reasoning was precise and unsparing. He said that we spend enormous energy fearing the things we might lose: our comfort, our status, our security, our pleasures. But what we almost never do is sit down and ask ourselves what would actually happen if we lost them. The fear of loss, Seneca argued, is almost always worse than the loss itself. We have never tested our ability to survive difficulty because we are too busy avoiding it, so the threat of hardship maintains enormous power over us. We make decisions based on fear of loss rather than clarity of values. We stay in wrong situations because we are afraid of the discomfort that comes with leaving them. We avoid necessary risks because we cannot tolerate the imagined deprivation on the other side. But the person who has voluntarily tasted hardship, who has sat with hunger or cold or rejection or loneliness and discovered that they survived, that person has done something extraordinary. They have robbed difficulty of its greatest weapon, which is the unknown. Seneca would say, "Go without something you depend on for a short period. Not forever, just for a little while. Notice what happens. You will discover one of two things. Either the thing you feared losing was actually manageable to live without, which means your fear was inflated, or you will discover a genuine vulnerability that you can now address with clear eyes rather than avoidance. Either way, you win. Mental toughness is not built during comfort. It is not accumulated through ease. It is built through deliberate, repeated contact with things that are difficult, and the slow, stubborn discovery that you are more capable of enduring them than you believed. Seneca knew this not as theory, but as lived reality. His own exiles, his own losses, had taught him that what he feared losing was never quite as devastating as the fear itself suggested. And he wanted you to learn that lesson before life forced it on you, because life will always eventually force it on you. The only question is whether you arrive at difficulty with some training, or whether you arrive completely unprepared. The third lesson from Seneca reaches into the territory that breaks the most people, and it is simply this. Learn to distinguish between what is in your control and what is not, and then stop torturing yourself over the second category. This is, of course, a core Stoic principle, but Seneca expresses it with a particular rawness and practicality that many of his contemporaries did not match. He observed something true about human psychology. We are remarkably talented at suffering over things we cannot change. We lie awake at 3 a.m, replaying conversations we cannot undo. We exhaust ourselves with anxiety over outcomes that have not yet occurred and that we cannot determine. We carry the weight of other people's opinions and choices as though we were responsible for them. We grieve not just what happened, but what might still happen, and we grieve it in advance, doubling our suffering. Seneca had a phrase that captures this precisely. He said that we suffer more in imagination than in reality, and this is not a dismissal of real pain. Seneca was not a man who told people to simply stop feeling things. He had buried people he loved. He had been stripped of his home. He understood suffering. What he was identifying was the specific additional layer of suffering that comes from mental resistance to reality, from arguing with what has already happened, from refusing to accept what cannot be changed. Mental toughness, in Seneca's view, requires drawing a sharp and ruthless line between what belongs to you and what does not. Your choices, your values, your efforts, your character, your responses to circumstances, these are yours. The weather, the economy, other people's decisions, death, illness, the turning of political fortune, these are not yours. And the energy you pour into trying to control or resist the things that are not yours is energy stolen directly from the things that are. This does not mean passivity. Seneca was one of the most active, engaged men of his era. He worked relentlessly on the things within his power, but he refused to torment himself over the things that were not, because he understood that such torment accomplished nothing except to diminish the person doing the tormenting. In practical terms, this lesson asks you to develop what might be called emotional triage. When something goes wrong, before you react, ask yourself, is this something I can actually change? If yes, focus every ounce of your energy on changing it. If no, your only available work is adjusting your relationship to it. Not pretending it does not hurt, not performing cheerfulness you do not feel, but refusing to let your suffering over the unchangeable consume the energy you need for the changeable. That distinction, made clearly and consistently, is one of the most powerful mental disciplines a person can ever develop. The fourth lesson Seneca teaches is one that might seem surprising from a man who spent decades at the center of Roman political power. Be extremely careful who you spend your time with, because the people around you are shaping your mind whether you invite them to or not. Seneca is extraordinarily blunt on this point. He writes that you should retreat into yourself as much as possible and spend time with people who are likely to improve you, and let those who you will improve in through your door. He is not preaching isolation. He valued friendship deeply, and he wrote some of the most moving reflections on grief and connection in the ancient world. But he had also observed with the clear eyes of someone who had lived in courts and crowds what prolonged exposure to certain kinds of people does to a person. He observed that anxiety is contagious, that cynicism spreads, that small, fearful, complaining minds drag other minds down to their level without anyone noticing it is happening. You do not choose to become like the people you spend most of your time with. It simply happens the way a room gradually takes on the smell of whatever burns inside it. Mental toughness requires an honest audit of your environment. Not a cruel one, not a dismissive one, but an honest one. Seneca would ask you to look at the people who occupy the most space in your daily life and ask yourself, do these people challenge you to be more than you are, or do they confirm you in being less? Do they bring out your courage or your fear? Do they push you toward growth or pull you toward stagnation? Do they speak about life with vitality and possibility, or do they narrate it as a series of obstacles and grievances? The answers to these questions have enormous consequences for your mental toughness. You will not develop inner strength in an environment that consistently reinforces inner weakness. You will not build courage in a community that mocks those who try. This does not require cruelty toward those who are struggling. Compassion is not incompatible with limits. But Seneca is asking you to be intentional rather than passive about who gets access to your mind, because the quality of the minds around you becomes, over time, the quality of your own. The fifth lesson from Seneca is the one that hits hardest when you first encounter it, and it is this: philosophy without action is vanity. Or in language Seneca might have used himself. Stop learning how to live and start actually doing it. Seneca had a sharp eye for a particular kind of self-deception that is just as common today as it was in ancient Rome. It is the self-deception of the person who reads endlessly about courage without ever doing anything courageous, who studies resilience without ever putting themselves in a position where resilience is required, who consumes wisdom without ever applying it to the actual conditions of their life. He called this burying oneself in books, and he considered it a sophisticated form of avoidance. Knowledge, Seneca insisted, is not the destination. It is preparation for action. The person who knows everything about Stoicism but still allows fear to dictate their choices has learned nothing that matters. The person who can quote every great philosopher on the subject of loss, but still cannot face their own grief, honestly has missed the entire point of philosophy. What Seneca is pointing to here is the gap that exists in almost every person between what they know and how they live. We know that resentment poisons us more than it poisons the person we resent, and yet we hold on to it for years. We know that most of our worries never materialize, and yet we spend hours each day feeding them. We know that we should have the difficult conversation, make the hard decision, take the leap that fear has been postponing, and yet we do not. Mental toughness is not a theoretical achievement. It is a behavioral one. It is built in the moments when you choose action over avoidance, honesty over comfort, courage over the path of least resistance. And those moments are only available in real life, not in reading about real life. Seneca urged his readers to take their philosophy out into the world and test it, to let the difficult circumstances of actual living be the examination that reveals whether their wisdom was real or merely intellectual. This is, ultimately, the only test that matters. When the thing you have been dreading finally arrives, when the relationship ends, or the business fails, or the health shatters, or the grief descends, you will not be reached by what you have read. You will be sustained only by what you have practiced. The sixth and final lesson Seneca gives us about mastering mental toughness is the one that makes all the others possible, and it is perhaps the most demanding of them all. Make your peace with death, not someday, but now. This is the lesson that modern culture most aggressively resists. We have built an entire civilization on the premise that death is optional, or at least far away, or at the very least something we do not need to think about right now. We fill every silence with noise and every moment with distraction, partly because stillness allows the awareness of mortality to surface, and most people find that unbearable. Seneca found it essential. He wrote about death with a directness that can feel brutal until you realize it is actually an act of extraordinary generosity. He is offering you the one piece of awareness that, more than any other, has the power to transform the way you live. He writes that we should prepare our minds as if we had come to the very end of life, and that every day should be lived as if it contains both a beginning and a completion. He is not trying to depress you. He is trying to liberate you. Because here is what Seneca understood, and what you will understand if you sit with it honestly. Almost everything that holds you back from living fully is connected, at some level, to a refusal to accept that you're going to die. The fear of failure is ultimately a fear of wasted time, which is ultimately a fear that there is not enough of it. The fear of rejection is ultimately a fear that you are not worth the finite investment of another person's attention in this brief life. The fear of loss is ultimately the pain of impermanence, of knowing that everything you love will eventually be taken from you or you from it. When you look at these fears without flinching, when you say clearly and without evasion that yes, you are going to die, that everyone you love is going to die, that everything you have built will eventually be undone, something remarkable can happen. The pettiness falls away. The grudges reveal themselves as the waste they are. The things you have been postponing suddenly become urgent, not with panic, but with clarity. The people you love become more precious, precisely because they are not permanent. The work you care about becomes more meaningful, precisely because your time for doing it is limited. Seneca died facing death with the composure of someone who had been practicing for it his whole life. According to those present, he spoke calmly, comforted those who wept, and faced the end without panic or rage. This was not accident. It was the result of a lifetime of honest reckoning with mortality, of choosing to look directly at the thing most people look away from, and discovering that it did not destroy him to look. It made him more alive. Mental toughness, in the deepest sense that Seneca meant it, is not the ability to feel nothing. It is not the performance of strength. It is not the suppression of fear or grief or pain. It is the capacity to feel all of those things fully and still remain grounded in your values, still act in accordance with your character, still choose the harder and better path even when every instinct is telling you to retreat. It is the quiet, unshakable knowledge that you are more than your circumstances, more than your fear, more than whatever is currently pressing against you with its full weight. That knowledge is not given to you. It is built. It is built in small daily decisions, in voluntary discomfort, in honest reckoning with time, in the careful tending of your mind and your environment, in the relentless practice of translating wisdom into action. It is built in the willingness to look at what scares you and remain standing. Seneca gave us the blueprint. The rest, as it always has been, is up to us.